Is the myth of abundance in America keeping us from taking action on critical water issues? We'll talk about that next on Global Perspectives.
This program is made possible, in part, by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office, the Global Connections Foundation, and the India Center at UCF.
This is Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia, Special Assistant to the President for Global Perspectives at the University of Central Florida.
Hello and welcome to Global Perspectives. With critical issues such as marine pollution, overfishing, and climate change, it would seem obvious that we are experiencing a global water crisis. In fact, almost 1 billion people do not have access to clean drinking water today, and over 3.5 million die each year from water-related diseases. Yet so many of us are unaware of the challenges the rest of the world faces in regards to water issues. Alexandra Cousteau recognizes this dilemma and has dedicated her life's work to shedding light on the planet's water crisis. She is the founder of Blue Legacy, a nonprofit organization dedicated to telling the story of what she calls our water planet. Cousteau, granddaughter of the legendary Jacques-Yves Cousteau, is also a filmmaker and storyteller, using innovative communication techniques to rally the world toward her family's legacy in science, advocacy, and education. Globally recognized for her environmental efforts, Cousteau has been honored as a United Nations Earth Trustee and a National Geographic Emerging Explorer. Welcome to the show, Ms. Cousteau.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us exactly what the global water crisis is, maybe starting from the big picture and then bringing it into a sharper focus for us locally?
Well, the global water crisis is a term that is used to describe a lot of different aspects of the humanitarian and environmental issues we're facing with water. The water and sanitation issue, which is a terrible tragedy. Over 1 billion people don't have access to clean, fresh drinking water. 2.5 billion don't have access to sanitation. It's definitely an issue involving water and the lack of water, but it's not necessarily a water crisis. The water and sanitation issue is really caused by poverty, lack of infrastructure, poor governance, corruption, but not so much water. If it was a water crisis, we wouldn't have people living in the American Southwest. But we have the infrastructure, we have the governance, we have the funds to be able to create a situation where the deserts bloom. And so that leads us to another issue that people talk about frequently, which is bottled water. That's not really a water crisis. You know, we're not going to stop the water crisis by banning water bottles everywhere. It's not going to make a dent in it, in fact. Pollution of coastal zones or overfishing, those are crises as well, but it's not the global water crisis. So what is the global water crisis? And I think if we're going to have a chance at solving these issues, we need to shape the conversation about what it is so that we can all work on solutions together. From my perspective, when I see rivers like the Colorado River that no longer reach the sea, or rivers like the Mississippi River that drain 40% of the continental United States that end in a dead zone, I realize that we're creating a problem. And that problem is really, comes down to two things. We're fragmenting our watersheds. And that's leading to a situation where increasingly we don't have enough water where we need it, when we need it. And the water we do have is no longer of good enough quality for us to swim in, drink from, and eat the fish from. And issues like climate change are going to simply be a gas pedal on those issues. Systems that can no longer retain water during floods, release water in drier periods, that no longer have natural filtration capacity are going to be worsened by stronger storm systems, more frequent storms. Wet places are going to get wetter, dry places are going to get drier. that's the impact that climate change will have on these broken systems. And so we need to think about water in our own communities, water in our own backyards, and start to understand where our water comes from, what happens to it as it passes through our lives, and where it goes when it leaves us. And here in Florida, there's ample opportunity to have discussions about where the water comes from and what happens to it and where it goes, with the Everglades and Lake Okeechobee and some of the coastal issues in the Keys.
Well, what are the basics that people in Florida, for example, need to know about where the water originates, where it goes, and what happens in between?
Well, every system is so unique. You know, water is a global issue on many levels, but in terms of our community and our lives and our backyards, it's a very local issue. And so, you know, water may come from groundwater, it may come from desalination, it may come from mountain streams. Every community gets water from a different system. So that's why I say, know your watershed. Know what watershed you live in. And a watershed is really an area that drains water from a parcel of land. Rivers and drainage basins capture water in mountains, drive it downstream and out to the ocean. That's a watershed. What watershed does Orlando sit in? What watersheds feed the people of Florida? And it's different for each community. There's, it may seem overwhelming to start thinking about where the water comes from, because we're used to thinking that it just comes from the tap. But there's networks of extraordinary water heroes, I think of them as water heroes, who are out there every day looking into these issues and helping protect the quality and quantity of our water. And those are our water keepers. There are water keepers and river keepers and coast keepers all over Florida. And so finding your local water keeper is the best place to start, I think. You can give them a call, tell them you want to know where your water comes from, and they'll probably take you and show you and explain all the different issues, which is a wonderful place to start, because by understanding that, it gives us an opportunity to know the threats and know how we can be part of the solution.
It sounds like education is one of the most vital aspects of this. How early is appropriate to start teaching children about water issues?
It's a great question. In my opinion, it's never too early. You know, as a child of the Cousteau family, I learned to swim when I was 3 months old. My grandfather took me scuba diving for the first time when I was 7. So water has always been a huge part of my life. And I think some of the most meaningful memories that I have were in little creeks and rivers and streams, places where I caught tadpoles and frogs and crayfish, memories that I share with millions of children and adults, I think, and grandparents across North America. And I think that, you know, exploration is something we think of when we think of people like Sir Edmund Hillary, who scaled Everest for the first time, or my grandfather, who invented scuba diving and pulled back the curtain on 70% of our planet. But the truth is that the more I travel and the more I explore on my own, and the more I see new places, the more I'm convinced that exploration really is a very personal pursuit. And exploring our own backyards can be an extraordinary thing, especially when we share that experience with a child who always inspires us to see things differently. And the solutions, I believe, will be found in our own communities, in our own backyards. If we all go and touch our water, know our water, and be part of protecting the water in our community, then if everybody does that, we won't have a problem anymore. And that's what we need to remember, is that the crisis is real and it's global, but the solutions are local. And the solutions are ones that we can all be a part of implementing. And I think that's empowering. And it requires exploration. It requires going out and touching our water. My grandfather said that people will protect what they love, and they'll love what they know. The only reason we don't love our water is because we don't know it.
What are some of the most common misconceptions that people have about water? And are these common to communities everywhere, or are they also unique?
No, it's funny. I had an expedition in 2009 where I spent 100 days traveling across 6 continents, looking into trying to understand what the global water crisis was all about. And as we did that, we produced short films and blogs and photo galleries and really invited people to follow along our journey with us every single day. And we had students and journalists and grandparents and all sorts of people tuning into our website and really engaging on these issues with us as we traveled. And when we came back to North America, we got a lot of feedback, and so many people said, you know, that was incredible. We really enjoyed, you know, following along with you on your expedition. And clearly, there's a global water crisis, obviously. I mean, you showed it to us, but just so thankful and relieved that we don't have any of those problems in North America. And I thought, this myth of abundance is part of the problem. It's really hampering our ability to understand the issue and get involved. And I would say that myth of abundance is the biggest threat to our ability to solve these issues.
Now, this particular expedition sounds fascinating in that you were actually visiting water in various locations to have that firsthand experience. You were doing documentary work, but you were also communicating this to the world at large. It sounds like a massive social media undertaking.
It was, and it was, I mean, it was so much fun for me. I had a crew of 6 people, and we just left for 3.5 months and just traveled, and it was extraordinary. But it was also very meaningful and satisfying for us because we were able to invite people to join us. You know, when filmmakers go out in the field, they have extraordinary experiences, but then they come back and distill all of those experiences into 1 or 2 hours. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted people to be able to be part of it with us as much as they could be. And so that's why we did it that way. And it was a very successful approach. We came back from that, and after hearing all of this feedback about how we didn't have a problem in America with water issues, we decided to do a big expedition that we called Expedition Blue Planet North America, and we left for 140 days. And I had to solve the issue of how to travel 12 people around North America with our hundreds of pounds of gear and personal items. And so we decided we would rent a bus, and kind of like a political figure in a campaign or a rock band, we would travel around on this bus. And we actually found John McCain's former Straight Talk Express. Oh. And we recycled it, made it biodiesel. It had also been Paul McCartney's Summer Live '09 tour bus, so it was it had a storied history. And we traveled 18,800 miles on that bus. Wow. Telling stories across North America. We traveled the entire length of the Colorado River watershed from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the Sea of Cortez. We traveled through the Gulf of Mexico region about a year after the oil spill. We traveled through the American countryside, really, and up into Canada. We did Mexico. So we really touched on a lot of the major issues in North America. And let me tell you, there is a great American water crisis. Don't mistake it. And we're all part of solving it.
Now, your trip also included East Coast, maybe Florida, or was that not part of the expedition?
We touched on Florida. We didn't make a film in Florida, but we actually had a lot of community events here. And that was one of the things that was really important to me as we set off, was that we left fully funded for the duration of the expedition, but we wanted to use our presence in different communities to help support local waterkeeper groups. Mm-hmm. And so we would stop in a community and really try to help raise funds for waterkeepers in that community, bring members of the community out onto the water for a sail or a trip of some kind. I would give talks in libraries and schools, and we did that here in. We actually did a couple cleanups here in Florida. Mm-hmm. Spoke at a couple schools, engaged the community, supported the local waterkeepers, and that was really a lot of fun.
And you have a Florida connection going some years back that most people probably don't know about.
It's true, actually. I was in my early 20s. I lived in Vero Beach. I was on the board of directors of the Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute in Fort Pierce. So I spent a couple years working there with the dolphin research people and the aquaculture people, and it was a wonderful experience.
So in terms of the water crisis, where are people making progress, noticeable, measurable progress that you can hold up as an example for other communities?
You know, again, I go back to the progress that we're making on protecting our water resources in different communities. You know, when we are successfully able to stop pollution events and stop polluters and protect our supplies, that's a huge success. When we're able to replace infrastructure and invest in new water treatment facilities, new sewers, new pipes, that's a huge success, because aging infrastructure is one of the big problems. When communities go out and get their children in nature, exploring rivers, exploring beaches, helping to clean it up, and educating the next generation on why this is important, that's a huge success. But we also have some historical successes that we need to protect as well. The Clean Water Act was landmark legislation 40 years ago. The United States was well ahead of the curve in all of that environmental legislation that they were passing back then. You know, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. These were really important things that no one had really done up until that time, and other countries have since copied and pasted that legislation into their own rules of law. Unfortunately, the Clean Water Act is something we need to protect, and we can't take it for granted. We need to make sure that changes to that legislation don't undermine our ability to protect our waters in our communities. And I think that's an issue that people ought to take notice of. And for me, it's not a partisan issue. For me, it's an issue of protecting our most important resource, because everything we put in our water is going to be there for our children and our grandchildren. And we are putting a lot into our water. 80,000 chemicals that haven't been tested, that are present in household chemicals and other products that we freely buy and use every day. When we put things down our sewers, down our drains, it ends up in our water, it ends up in the lives and probably the bodies of our children and our grandchildren. And it's something that we need to be more aware of and that we need to get involved in, because it's protecting the health of our communities and the health of our families. And that's something that I think is important to everyone.
Is there enough collective concern in the U.S. Congress and other political bodies to take the initiative on this, or is it something that's going to have to come from the grassroots?
I would say that we definitely need grassroots support to continue to protect this kind of legislation. There's a sad tendency today to feel like we have to compromise our environment in order for economic progress to be able to continue. And I don't believe that. In fact, this country has extraordinary natural resources. It has rich soils and forests and water and game and natural ports. And when the settlers came here, they had a wonderland of natural resources that really helped build the prosperity of the United States. And thinking that we have to compromise that in order to continue to build this nation is a mistake. Because as we pollute our water, as we destroy our forests, as we destroy our coasts and our fisheries, we're impoverishing ourselves, but more importantly, we're impoverishing future generations. There's a way to do both, and that's been proven. We just have to find a way for it to work for us. And I think that requires a little bit of innovation, a little bit of thinking outside the box, a little bit of research and development, but it's entirely possible. And that's the kind of America I think we all want to live in. We just have to see the possibilities.
Talk to us about the connections between the water crisis and climate change. You mentioned a lot of things, the rich soil, the coast, the seaports and everything else. Many of those will change as sea levels rise and climate change alters the conditions in parts of the country. I was looking at a documentary not too long back that was discussing how the grain belt in the U.S. Midwest would be moving northward to Canada over the next few decades. And so how will things like that affect the water issue?
Well, water is the vehicle through which we'll feel the impacts of climate change. We're going to feel it in the amount and availability of water. So as weather systems shift and change, we'll have wet places get wetter, dry places get drier. The severity and intensity of storms will increase. You know, we often think that climate change means that the world will just keep getting warmer. And so when we have an unusually cold winter, it means that climate change doesn't exist. Well, I think global warming was an unfortunate term to use because it doesn't really reflect the nature of the changes that we need to expect. Climate change is really more about unforeseeable extreme weather events. So unusually cold winters, just like unusually hot summers, unusually severe storms, unusual flooding events like we saw in the Mississippi River. All of these are indicators that our climate is changing. And it's better, I think, to invest in research and development and clean technologies and changing our lifestyle to prevent climate change, what we're anticipating climate change will bring, rather than do nothing. Because I have a 7-month-old daughter, and I really want her to live in the kind of world I grew up in. I want her to be able to take her children to see some of these extraordinary places and have this abundance that we are used to here. And I really am very concerned that 99% of the scientists who tell us what is happening with climate change, they're foretelling a world that's somewhat different from the one that we're used to. And if we love our children, we need to think about it, and we need to understand it, and we need to make changes, because we will feel it in our water.
Some of the scientists who warn us about the potential problems we could have as a result of global climate change have suggested that so much has happened it may be too late to make the kind of difference that would keep the world the way it was when you were younger. Is it too late?
Well, I think it is too late for a certain amount of change. I think we will inevitably feel a certain amount of change. We already are. Nothing we do is going to turn back the clock. But we can prevent the worst. And that is something that I'm keenly interested in, is preventing the worst. There's also another aspect to our carbon dioxide emissions that isn't at all involved in temperature, but is involved in the acidity of our oceans. The oceans absorb a lot of carbon dioxide, and the more carbon dioxide the oceans absorb, the more carbonic acid is present in the oceans, and that's called ocean acidification. It's been scientifically proven we can replicate what's happening in the oceans in our laboratories, and it's having a serious impact on the food chain. One thing we forget, even if we live in the middle of the continent and have never been to the ocean is our life support system. It supports life on this planet, and if the oceans become more acidic and the base of the food chain starts to diminish and literally disintegrate, we're going to live in a very different world. I mean, if the oceans die, so does life on land, and it's game over. And the oceans are acidifying as we speak. So reducing carbon emissions isn't only smart for the temperature of our world, but also for the possibility of having the biodiversity that we currently enjoy be something that continues into the future.
Good. Well, thank you for joining us today, Ms. Cousteau.
Thank you.
And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia. We'll see you next time.
This program is made possible, in part, by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office, the Global Connections Foundation, and the India Center at UCF.